Welcome, students, to our next lesson. And if you are attending to this lesson for the first time, just tap on the subscription key and you start following me on this very important journey that I'm taking students. So in lesson 1, we had looked at the cover page and the preliminary pages. Now we are moving to lesson 2, where we are going to look entirely and in detail chapter 1, that is introduction. So what are we saying here? We are saying that in as far as chapter 1 is concerned, the general introduction highlights what is in the whole proposal first, then goes on to introduce what is in section 1 of the proposal. So we are saying that chapter 1, that is introduction, it does 2 introductions that are found in 1. The first part of introduction will be about the whole proposal or the whole research report. And the second one will be specifically talking about what this chapter 1 will contain. So, for example, general introduction will be like this. This section introduces the research proposal in brief. The proposal is in 3 sections that cover a general introduction in chapter 1, literature review in chapter 2, and methodology in chapter 3. That is, if it is just a research proposal. But if it's a whole thesis, then we will bring in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Now, the narrowed introduction will be like, chapter 1 section presents the background to the research problem and the statement of the problem, as well as the study objectives. It includes subsections describing the hypotheses to be tested, a statement on the significance and scope of the study, a description of the conceptual framework, and definition of key concepts. So you can see that in one introduction, we are having 2 introductions. The first introduction is general and is talking about the whole research. The second introduction is narrowed and is talking about specifically what chapter 1 is going to look at. So 1.1 will be introduction, meaning the title of chapter 1. That is 1.0 introduction. That is the title of chapter 1. Then 1.1 will be background of the study. Background of the study. So what do we mean? What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to include in the background of the study? What you are supposed to do is as follows. Background to the study presents the rationale. Rationale meaning the reason behind, providing evidence which are facts and conditions of the existing situation to make the reader feel the urgency of the problem and the need to investigate it in order to suggest or contribute research findings that can be useful in finding a solution. So you have to show in the background of the study, you have to show by evidence, providing evidence that a given condition exists in a given situation, and there is urgency for a research or a study to be done or an investigation to be done, because when there is a problem, there are causes, there are effects, there are solutions, and what are. So the background may be funnel shaped in the sense that it locates a study within the broader global context and narrows it to the regional, national, and finally to local context. I think on my whiteboard, you can see a funnel-like thing, drawing. Meaning, when you are showing the background of the problem under study, you start at the global level, you come at the continental level, you come to the regional level, country level, national level, then to a locality, to a local context where you will be carrying out the study. Then we are saying that it should capture all variables under study, meaning this background is supposed to capture all variables under study. Now, variables are found in your title. Your title shows clearly the independent variables and dependent variables, as much as we may want also to mention intervening variables, which are beyond the researcher's control. So, all sources of information must be cited and acknowledged and properly documented. Because when you are developing a background, you are reading what other people have written. So you are supposed to acknowledge, you are supposed to cite using APA style and make sure everything is okay. 1.2, a subsection of chapter 1, is statement of the problem. Statement of the problem. So, the statement of the problem does the following 4 things. Number 1, it focuses on what the student perceives as the problem that warrants further research. Number 2, the nature of the problem and its known dimensions or estimated magnitude. Number 3, the student indicates the gaps in knowledge that justify undertaking further research. Number 4, a statement of what she or he is going to do in the proposed research. So the concluding sentence of the research problem should be clear and precise. So the final sentence should reflect what the title of the study says about the research or says the research is about. For example, if the title reads, Investigating the relationship between immunization and the level of health of children under 5 years of age, the case study of Nairobi County, Kenya. Then there can be another, another example for a concluding sentence of that, of the statement of the problem can be, the study will investigate the relationship between immunization and the level of health of children under 5 years of age in Nairobi County, Kenya. So, the statement of the problem is a very important part of any research. Why? It sets the limit of what the student wants to do. It is from this statement that one derives objectives, hypotheses, and all the research questions, and thus the research design. It is from this statement that one gets the scope and significance of the research. Therefore, the problem must be in a researchable area. The statement of the problem should be 3/4 of a page to 1 page. So what are we saying here? We are saying that the problem statement is very important, and the way you develop it, it is derived from your topic of study, and therefore your thesis statement is clearly seen in this problem statement, because your thesis statement will show the topic and your opinion about that topic. Then within this problem statement, you go ahead to show how it is a problem in terms of giving evidence, figures, showing us where, and even suggesting what should be done, when, where, and how it should be done. So after statement of a problem, you move to 1.3, that is objectives of the study. Now, objectives of the study, this is what you want to achieve at the end of your study. So you have to set them in a smart way. Yeah, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant or realistic, and time bound. They must be smart. But we are saying here that the objectives include the general objective and the specific objectives. For example, now you label 1.3.1. That will be general objective of the study. So what is a general objective of the study? It's almost like the goal of the study. Now, a general objective is the overall goal of the research. It is derived from the topic and statement of the problem. Specific objectives of the study are derived from the general objective. Example, let me give you an example of a general objective. You can say the general objective of the study is to find out the relationship between immunization and the level of health of children under 5 years of age. That's how you state your general objective that you would want to achieve. But you cannot achieve it alone by this project or this research alone, yeah, because it's general. Then 1.3.2, specific objectives. Now, the specific objectives arise directly from general objective of the study. They break down the general objective into relationships to be investigated for each variable. So what are we talking about when we are talking of specific objectives? The key concepts of the study, e.g. immunization, health, and under age 5 should be operationalized to identify their components. That is it. Then the student then chooses the variables and relationships to investigate. Each variable and its relationship to another can form a specific objective of the study. So we are saying when you are coming up with the objectives, the first objective could be about demographic statistics about or characteristics about respondents. But objective 2, try to link the independent variable and the dependent variable to see if there is any relationship. Then also the actual number of specific objectives is influenced by the nature of the relationships the student is interested in investigating. Another thing you have to notice is the number of specific objectives will influence the volume of the literature review and data to be collected. So one should limit the number of specific objectives to be investigated in relation to the time, finances, and volume of data one can handle properly within those limitations. So it is assumed that the findings of the study will lead to recommendations, so there is no need for a specific objective about recommendation. Don't say that the study will recommend this or the study will conclude this. Don't mention that. Don't do that. So specific objectives are stated in a short, practical sentences and numbered in Arabic numerals. They should be smart, specific, measurable, meaning quantitative research, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So what am I saying in a nutshell? I'm saying that when you are constructing your objectives, come up with about 4 or 5 objectives alone. Like objective number 1 should be about demographic characteristics of respondents. Now, objective number 2 should be establishing whether there is a relationship between the IV independent variable and the dependent variable. Then objective 3 could be the magnitude of the relationship, or the direction of the relationship, whether it is direct proportional or indirect proportional. Then you also establish if there is a significant relationship between independent variable and dependent variable. Now, after specific objectives, you derive research questions from specific objectives. If you have 4 or 5 objectives, then you are likely also to have 4 or 5 questions, because research questions are objectives turned into questions, and that will be 1.4. So what are we saying? We're saying it is not always necessary to turn specific objectives into research questions. Yeah. In fact, it is tedious. Research questions are usually used in exploratory studies because the researcher is not so familiar with the research area and cannot therefore predetermine what relationships to examine or investigate. However, research questions help to focus students on what it is they are investigating. That is why specific objectives are sometimes turned into research questions. Now, there is 1.5, research hypothesis, if applicable. So here we are saying if you decide to use research questions, it is advisable that don't use hypotheses. If you decide to use hypotheses, then don't use research questions. Why and how do you select one? You use research questions when you are green, when you don't know anything about what you are going to research about. If you don't know anything, use research questions. But if you have some information about the facts you are going to collect, then change those facts into hypotheses so that you only go to the field to confirm or nullify what you already think it is. So, what is this all about, research hypothesis? Stating hypothesis presumes a research method where the researcher will control the variables in order to attribute cause and effect. It presupposes a pre-post research design or statistical analysis that delineates a null and alternative hypothesis to be tested. So, the student tests hypotheses in a study where the variable can be controlled, i.e., where the researcher can manipulate the independent variable in order to bring about a given predetermined behavior in the dependent variable. So variables are stated in terms of null and alternative. Null in negative form, alternative in positive form. So we are saying, yeah, in a controlled experiment, for example, or set up and observe the effect on the dependent variable, that is it. So another situation where hypotheses can be tested is when the independent and dependent variable are known to vary together in a systematic manner, meaning you already know, i.e., where the change in one variable is correlated to change in another variable. So you already know. But if you don't know, use questions. So there should be no intervening variable that can cause the variations, or there should be a provision for determining the contribution of the intervening variable or a statistical measure of the margin of error. Meaning, as much as you are trying to establish the correlation between independent and dependent variables, you would find that there would be significant relationship, yes, but you are supposed to establish the significance level of error margin that within which it's acceptable. Yeah, and also the aspect of intervening variable. Intervening variable is a variable that is not within the control of the researcher. It is beyond. But you see, the independent and dependent variables are playing out in an environment which is beyond the researcher's control. So we are also saying that other situations call for examining, observing, investigating the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. There are other types of hypotheses, but for the master's degree, testing the null and alternative hypothesis is just sufficient. So the decision to use objectives and questions, objectives alone, or test hypotheses will dictate the choice of research design that we shall see in chapter 3, and the method and the type of findings and how they are analyzed and reported. (1.6) Scope of the study. Scope of the study. The student must show the depth of investigation by indicating the content and geographic area as well as time scope of the study. One should also indicate how long data collection is expected to take, especially for cross-sectional data collection, because you'll find given characteristics can appear in a given span of time, and beyond that span of time, that cannot happen. And this is more so in scientific researches where we use cross-sectional method. So what are we saying here? We are saying that under 1.6.1, looking at geographical scope, the researcher should tell the reader the location or the study area physically, because it has characteristics. That area has characteristics which are likely to interplay, and in one way or another, the characteristics would form part of the independent variables and dependent variables. 1.6.2 content scope. Here, the researcher is supposed to show clearly, precisely, the variables to be investigated in the study. The variables to be investigated in the study. And in this case, they are the independent variables and the dependent variables. Then 1.6.3, the scope, time scope, meaning period to be covered during which data is collected, and the period with which the study is to be carried out, maybe between these months and these months, because time has also an impact to the data we are collecting. So scope is very important, because you are trying to tell us where exactly physically that you are carrying out your research or your study. Then, what characteristics, what variables are you trying to collect and determine? Then, this study is done from when up to when? Because when we know the time aspect, we shall be able to know what happened. And you see, what else happened has an impact on our data. 1.7, justification of the study. Justification of the study. Here, the researcher will give the reason and the rationale for wanting to carry out the proposed research, which must and should be spelled out in this subsection. Is it an existing gap in knowledge, a novel idea that must be tested, or a problem that cannot be addressed without empirical evidence? So, the subsection explains why one needs to do that particular research. Why? That is justification. Then 1.8, significance of the study. Significance of the study. Here, the student or the researcher is expected to show the academic and practical relevance of his or her study. So he or she should state who is likely to benefit from the findings of the study and how they benefit. Usually, there are several stakeholders for any study or research. For example, the institutions, the agency or target group where the data is collected from should benefit from the findings. So what we are trying to say here is that if we didn't have problems on Earth, there would be no need for us to research. We only go out to do research because there are problems, there are needs, there are ideas, there are phenomena that we don't understand. And it's only when we carry out an empirical study, field study, laboratory study, that we are able to establish what is missing in terms of gaps in the knowledge. The study should indicate clearly how the institution would benefit from what the study will reveal. Other agencies or institutions in related areas of the research topic should also benefit. The student should show how each stakeholder or institution mentioned would benefit from the findings of the study. So still under significance, this researcher should also spell out the ways in which her or his study would add to existing stock of academic knowledge. Remember that a study does not solve all the problems. It doesn't solve the problems, but it provides information that can be used to solve the problem. So a project, however, might be designed to test a method or provide a solution. So what I'm saying here is that your findings are very important because they will help stakeholders, they will help decision makers, they will help policy developers to come up with an intervention, with a project, with a solution that will be able to handle the problem under study. 1.9, there is what we call research framework or research models. Here, a research study should have a framework to guide the thought, yes, process and communicate the same to the reader. There are several types of frameworks that can be adapted depending on the type, and level of analysis in a given study. Most studies require a conceptual and theoretical framework. The student may also include an analytical framework, an empirical framework, or a model depending on the type of research design adapted. So let us, for example, look at conceptual framework. Let us look at conceptual framework. let us look at conceptual framework. So when we are looking at conceptual framework, what we have in mind is that sometimes you can use either only conceptual framework or you use theoretical framework because they serve almost the same purpose. So what are we saying? A conceptual framework is very useful when it comes to if at all you don't know any theories, you don't know any theories and what have you. That's when you come up with a conceptual framework, meaning you are totally agreeing about what you want to do. So I'm saying that a conceptual framework is used to illustrate relationship between independent and dependent variables. This implies that there are studies that will not require a conceptual framework, but an analytical or other framework or model instead, depending on the nature of the study. The conceptual framework is a scheme of key research variables and the postulated relationships between them. For example, the topic and the statement of the problem center around some key concepts and the variables in those concepts. For example, immunization, quality of health, and under 5 years of age. These three key concepts can be broken down to the components, variables, within each of them and the relationship between the variables in the independent and dependent variables in each concept. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that the value of the conceptual framework is to help the student to do a number of things through a diagram or illustration or accompanying narrative. So you show diagrams, but you also explain briefly. You give a narrative. So the conceptual framework should have a relevant title. The title is numbered as a diagram or figure and placed under the diagram illustrations in APA style. Students of engineering, for example, or using other agreed styles, they could use other different. APA style might be appropriate for social sciences, should be careful to note where the title of the conceptual framework is placed and ensure it is placed there. So the conceptual framework should enable the student to do the following. Number one, analyze the key concepts of the study to derive specific variables and how they relate to one another in the stated problem of the proposed study. Every specific objective should be analyzed to identify the variables in it and how they relate to one another. Number two, each variable is operationalized or given its empirical equivalent. And number three, the tentative relationship between specific variables to be studied is stated. Number four, the student outlines the nature of the relationship between the variables of the study in a diagrammatic form. You show the independent variables and using arrows how they are affecting the dependent variables in relation to the problem. Number five, the empirical equivalence of the variables give indication of the data that must be collected to explain the variables. The diagram or illustration should be followed by brief narrative to explain what is presented. So that is about conceptual framework. Let us move to 1.9.2, theoretical framework. What is all about theoretical framework? A theoretical framework is a collection of intellectual concepts, a theory, but not necessarily so well worked out. A theoretical framework guides research in determining what things should be measured and what statistical relationships to look for. This can be read from Gleason, 1999. Theory guides every aspect of research, from formulation of research questions through operationalization and discussion. A theoretical framework is not a stand-alone copy and paste operations. No, a theory is selected on the basis of how best it can explain the relationships among the variables under your study. There should be a connection between theoretical framework, conceptual framework, operationalization of the variables, and instrument for collecting data. So, having a theory helps to identify the limits to the generalization made from the key concepts of the study. Therefore, a theoretical framework specifies which key variables influence a phenomenon of interest. It alerts the student to examine how those key variables might differ in varied populations. And this can be found from the website, 2015. Now, 1.9.3, there is what we call analytical framework. So we have seen conceptual framework, we have seen theoretical framework. So under theoretical framework, you choose one or two theories that are relevant to your study and briefly mention the titles of the theories, who developed the theories, when the theories were developed, the objective of the theories, and how relevant that theory is to your topic of study. So what do we mean by analytical framework? In psychology, an analytical framework is an intellectual tool which is created in order to help a researcher to collect, sort, prioritize, and interpret a variety of existing data and information about the subject or context that has been analyzed. Yes. The purpose of analytical framework is to give the study an analytic and disciplined methodology, allowing a systematic evaluation of data and thus enable the researcher to identify the main data needed to come to a conclusion. So analytical framework will help, like when you are making a study about, you want to verify a given theory, you carry out analytical study. So let us now move to 1.11, definition of key concepts and terms that have been or will be used in your research proposal or will be used in your thesis as a whole. So here, this is being the last part of chapter 1. Here, the key concepts in the research topic and objectives must be given operational definitions. Don't assume that readers will know. Don't assume that. So, the student should review literature on every key concept, evaluate the definitions and discussions, and select the meaning that best defines the concept in the context of the study he or she proposes to do. The final sentence of the definition of the concept should state, like, in this study, blah, 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 will mean, then you put the operational definition selected. The student does not make up these definitions, but rather reviews literature to relate their own understanding of the concept to its professional use by other scholars in the discipline of the study. So this is what a student is supposed to do in as far as chapter 1 is concerned, and I'm sure if you do that, you will come up with a very good chapter 1, which can be formidable, reliable, and one that we can believe in. So, okay, sorry, this is just my mask to make sure I'm keeping safe during this time of corona virus. So, I'm saying that chapter 1 is a very important chapter because it introduces, it introduces first the whole proposal, research proposal. It also introduces what chapter 1 specifically will look at. Therefore, you have to follow the format and make sure whatever you put under every subsection is precise, straight to the point. It can be understood and it can communicate what we are looking forward to see in the whole thesis or in the whole research proposal. So this is very important that we get to understand what is actually happening. But so far, today's lesson has been so good. And if you have a question, you have a suggestion, you have anything, you can be able to communicate to me at the appropriate time, and I'll be able to respond, because I'm looking forward to prepare good researchers, good scholars who can write and publish what they have written, because we have to publish what we have studied, what we have researched on. Why? Because readers all over the world will read our work and find solution or find guidance on how they can be able to come up with given policies. They can be able to come up and make informed decisions based on our research. So research is very important all over the world, in any country, even in your family. Most of the decisions you make, most of the policies you develop are based on empirical study, are based on findings from the field, which will inform you as to what you will decide to do. And therefore, it is very important that we do the right thing. We are not supposed to mislead, and make sure whatever you borrow from other scholars, please cite, acknowledge those people, because they did a lot of work. They worked hard to have developed that secondary source of data that you have relied on, that has helped you even to establish that there is a knowledge gap. Because if you have not read, how are you going to establish that there is a knowledge gap which you are going to fill? If you have not read other theories, how will you go to do analysis using analytical framework? How are you going to do that? You may not be able to do that. So I'm saying that under frameworks, we have 3: analytical framework, conceptual framework, theoretical framework. But you don't need to use all of them. You have to select that one that is relevant, applicable, and appropriate to your study. Don't just pick anything. Even when it comes to theoretical framework, when you are picking theories, don't pick any theory. No, read widely and be able to come up with 2 or 3 theories that are very relevant to your topic of study. Meaning they are going to help you, they are going to guide you, they are going to make sure that you don't go outside the framework. That is the work of the framework. So when you are using theoretical framework, it may not be necessary for you to use conceptual framework. But the two, for you to choose one, it will depend. It will depend. If you don't understand anything about your research, if you don't understand anything about what you are going to study, then you have to use theoretical framework. But if you understand, if you have prior knowledge, predetermined knowledge about what you are going to study, then it is advisable to use conceptual framework, because already you understand the scope, physical scope, you understand the variables found in that area, you understand everything, and therefore you know, you are only going to confirm. So that is where now you use conceptual framework, yeah, and instead of using research questions, you can end up just using hypotheses, and you'll be doing good, a very good academic work. Therefore, for today, I want to say thank you very much for attending this lesson, and I would encourage you to be encouraged and always bear in mind that you can do better than your lecturer. As a student, you can do better than your teacher. That is what we encourage students. That's what we advise students, that we are preparing to be future researchers, to be future scholars, to be future writers and authors of books. Because these books, the books we read, whether textbooks, storybooks, and what have you, the authors have done from research. They have done research. They have followed all steps of process of writing. So and when you write a book that is research oriented, research based, it is statistically acceptable. Yeah, it's factual. Then when you just imagine and you write a textbook, you might be misleading. But if your textbook or your book is out of research, then you have done the right thing. So like my book, my textbook that I published, it is a research-based textbook. It was a thesis turned into a textbook. And in another course, I'll be teaching students how you can change, how you can convert your thesis into a textbook that is publishable. Otherwise, thank you very much. And remember, practice makes perfect. Without practice, you cannot be perfect. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.